Well, hey fellow YouTubers, how are you doing? Listen, I wanted to do something. I get a lot of people make comments right and left. And one of the biggest comments I have is they say, Roland, I see in your shop you have hundreds of rods, and why do you need all those rods? And I don't have the budget to afford all those rods. And so my answer is, I have all those rods because I've had them for years and years and years. I've changed from Fenwick to Shakespeare to all these different Bass Pro Shop to favorite rods. So I've had a lot of different rods. Okay, that's not the question. The question, how many rods do you need? Now, I recently did a list of lures. I said my top favorite lures. I said there are 10 lures. Starting, I had a jerkbait, a topwater, a spinnerbait, all those kind of lures. And I said I had a rod for each one of them. But in some cases, you can use the same lure on one different rod, 2 or 3 different lures. So I'm going to say that right now, to effectively fish, and I'm going to show you the combinations. I need one rod that happens to have a worm on it. I have 2 rods that happen to have a frog on it. It's my big heavy rod. And number 3, I have a light rod. I have 3 rods. I think you can consolidate all your tackle and throw them on 3 basic rods. Now that's not what I recommend because I don't like tying lures on all the time, and I like to have backup rods and everything else. So I usually have like 10 rods. But if you had to have just 3 rods, I think you could handle my type of bass fishing. I basically fish, kind of power fish down here in the Everglades and in Lake Okeechobee, and I'm fishing heavy spinner baits. I'm fishing heavy line. I'm flipping a lot. I'm fishing Senkos a lot. But anyway, I'm kind of power fishing. So with this in the southeast of the United States, it's kind of my bailiwick. So anyway, let's talk about, first of all, let's talk about this rod right here. This is what I'm going to call a topwater rod. I happen to have a little topwater. This is one of those whopper ploppers. Okay, now watch this. Watch this. I'm going to go over to the water right here. This is a perfect little combination. I can throw the whopper plopper out there just perfect. Look at it, comes along there just perfect. It's just wonderful. That's just a great little topwater plug. This happens to be 17-pound monofilament line, and it happens to be the whopper plopper. Now, let's just look at these other lures for a second. When I was talking about before, I was talking about the different baits like jerk baits. I said, my number 10 choice was the jerk bait. Well, a jerk bait is kind of a lure that's good for this same rod. The difference is I don't want to be changing knots all the time. So I take this 17-pound line and I'll put a little clip on there. See that little clip? That's just a little, but it's a strong lure clip. Now you can get them different pound tests, and I get the heavy duty ones. And this for 17-pound line is strong enough to hold the line. Okay, I'm going to take the topwater off. I'm going to put this jerkbait on. Same little clip, just come through there, clip it. Okay, that's 2 of my lures. That's the topwater and now the jerkbait. The jerkbait. This is a perfect rod for that. What this rod is, I'm going to tell you what rod it is. It's 7 foot. It's actually a 7-foot medium rod. It's 7-foot medium, and so while I like a medium I like a medium action for jerk baits like this one here is a jerk bait. Okay, that's perfect. It's a perfect jerk bait rod. It's casted just perfectly well, real far. 17-pound lines, maybe a little heavy. Maybe at times I might want to go to the 14-pound line. I have plenty of line. Now the only problem with running just 3 rods is that I might take that topwater off and want to go put a light jerkbait on, and I might have to go change my line for a second or put a leader on. I might have to go to say here's some 14-pound line. 14-pound line would be a better choice for a jerkbait maybe in clear water. So the only problem with just having 3 rods is that you might have to change your line a few times. Okay, but for right now, that 17-pound line has got me the topwater plug. It's got me the jerkbait. Let's see what else it'll do. I'm going to take this off. And one of my other choices was a little crankbait, okay? I happen to use a little end in my demonstration, but this little small little Spro crankbait will do the job just fine. And again, I'm running on a 17-pound line. if I were really cranking the rocks at Okeechobee or doing some winter fishing, I might want to go lighter. I might want to go 10 or 12 pound line. Again, I might have to change the line. That's the only downfall of having just one rod. But this 7-foot medium action rod is the rod for this little plug. And I can throw it really well. I like monofilament over braid on a small crankbait like this. It's just a perfect combination. It's just the right length. I like a long rod. These 7-foot rods are just perfect. Oh, I think I had one. I don't know what, something hit it. Anyway, so that takes care of actually 3 of my combinations that I had before. The same rod now, did the top order, did the jerkbait, and now it's a pretty good little crankbait rod. 7-foot, medium action, 7-foot, medium action. Let's see what else it'll do. What about a chatterbait? Chatterbait was one of my favorite choices. And a chatterbait, according to Brett Height and all the guys that really use chatterbaits a lot, Brett Height throws this chatterbait on either 17-pound fluorocarbon or 17-pound monofilament. I happen to have 17-pound monofilament on it. I can take that same clip, come through the clip with a chatterbait. Hey, now that's a little Zaco tail with a little boot tail. Ooh, that's that new one, that new tail. That's the perfect rod. A light action 7-foot long medium action rod is perfect for a chatterbait. So now we've run 4 of the categories, 4 of the 10 categories that I wanted to talk about. I've been able to incorporate with this one rod, but I've got the problem of occasionally changing the line. You know, that's kind of a downer when you're out there, say, a tournament fishing and you're trying to make the next cast to a top water. All of a sudden I want to change to a top water. I got to take this off and change the top water. It's not too long because that's just a little clip. Now let's talk about another choice I had. One of the choices, one of my very top choices, is a lipless crankbait. It's a perfect rod for a lipless crankbait. 17-pound monofilament. That little clip come right through the little O-ring of the rattle trap. It is perfect. It is absolutely, just can't get a better rod than a 7-foot medium action for all 5 of those type of lures. Okay, now let's make a cast. Again, it's just the right combination. It's just the right length. It's just the right action. Everything's perfect. So I've handled 5 of my 10 top lures that I like with one rod. All 5 of them. A 7-foot medium action rod. Now this happens to be a favorite rod. It happens to be a rod that we're in a prototype design, but I like the medium action. But the main thing is I've now incorporated 5 of my favorite lures with one action. A 7-foot medium action rod by favorite. Okay, let's put that rod down. Let's talk about some other combinations here. Let's talk about really one of my really favorite combinations, and that's the old frog. That's a frog deal. Now a frog is a whole different ball game. This is a 7-foot 3 rod. It's a heavy action. It's actually a big flipping stick. I got a great big UGG button on here for putting it in my side. I got 65-pound test line on here. This isn't any kind of Mickey Mouse rod. This isn't like that rattle trap rod. This isn't like throwing a top water plug. This isn't like the chatterbait with 17-pound line. This is 65-pound braid. Heavy duty flipping stick. I'm throwing it in the worst cover you could ever imagine. I'm throwing it in the middle of the heaviest bushes in the whole Everglades. I'm throwing it in the logs in the log jam in Tennessee. I'm throwing it in the mesquite bushes out west in some of those desert lakes, out to the gnarly stuff that you wouldn't believe that you could get a fish out of. But you can get a fish out of there with frogs and heavy tackle if you use 65-pound braid and the right kind of flipping stick. Now, speaking of a flipping stick, if I want a flipping stick, and I said another combination is this jig, okay, there's a jig. I said that was one of my top favorite lures. Now I've covered 6 with that frog. That's the 6th one. This is the 7th lure that I said in my top 10. They were part of a really, really, really big deal. Along with the jig comes the flipping jigs. You know, the thing. The only problem is I got a frog on. Those little clips that I use, you saw me use that little clip. Don't try these clips on the 65-pound braid. It'll break open. But what you have to do now, you have to cut your line. The fish are out there waiting. I'm out here waiting. I don't have a backup. I got to take my time. I got to do another whole knot. I got to make a knot. This is wasting time in my estimation. That's why I don't like just 3 rods. So now I take and go up, do a Palomar knot. Fine, let's take 10 or 15 more seconds. 10 or 15 more seconds, and I've gotten the Palomar done. And now I'm looking at that nice little tree to flip this jig in, because I know there's a great big bass in there. Cut this off. Sure enough, now there's that big old tree a beaver just cut down. I'm going to take this jig and I'm going to throw it right in that tree. Flip it in there. Boom. Boy, it's really great. But it took 20 seconds. I had to take the frog off, tie the jig on, and do all that. Okay, that's fine. I go on down the bank and I see another nice, really nice little spot. One of the things that I'm going to show you real quick is another rod, and just for a second, I'm just going to have to bear with me. Let's just show you, I'm going to show you another rod that I have. It's exactly the same. It's a 7-foot 4-inch heavy action rod. It's all set up. I got 2 rods here, in fact. They're all the same. These are all the same, and I'm just going to show you this one. And what this is my heavy punch-in rod. It's 65-pound test line again. It's that exact same heavy-duty rod again. I've taken these little bobber stoppers and put it on that big, that happens to be a 2-ounce weight. I've snelled the hook. I've gone in there with a 65-pound braid and snelled that knot. It takes about 10 minutes to tie. And this is all set up for heavy-duty flipping. It's the same rod as I used for the frog. It's the same rod as I used for the jig. But it took me 10 minutes to tie this up. So now I don't want to cut it off. I will, and it's the rod just like the others. I can cut it off and tie the frog on, or tie whatever else I want. But I'm all set up with that, and I hate to spend all that time tying another knot. That's why I have a 2nd and 3rd and 4th rod. Might be the same action. In this case, I don't know what I got. This is what you. But anyway. So what I have done, even though I had that originally was a frog rod, heavy duty flipping stick, I got one of them set up for this big flipping bite. Okay, that's ready to go at all times. That's why I have more than 3 rods. You can use 3 rods. Along with that, let me tell you my one choice lure that's just fantastic lure. And this lure here is a killer lure. It is my killer deal. It's my hardtail grub by Yamamoto. I throw this so much of the time. I catch so many beautiful bass on this hardtail grub. It's just a great lure. I have a little weight on there, and it's again, I just catch a million fish on it. I don't care where I go, Lake Chickamauga, all over the country. I'll go up to the Potomac River in Maryland. I caught them on this. Anyway, this rod, by the way, is the same exact rod as I started with the frog rod. It's a heavy-duty flipping stick with the big handle on it. It's got 65-pound braid. So that's 4 lures now I'm throwing on the same rod. It's the same heavy-duty flipping stick. Now you can change rods and change your line and cut and just spend 15 or 20 minutes and changing your lures, but I just as soon have a 2nd or 3rd rod. So now what I really have in reality is I have a Swimbait rod, I have a flip stick rod, I have my jig rod, and if I had my 4th rod, I'd have a frog rod. I'd have all 4 of those rods would be the same. Well, that's getting me down to almost all of my lures that I really like to fish. Now, so far, I've covered them all with just 2 rods. Let's talk about the #1 lure of all times. Let's talk about the Cinco. Let's talk about the plastic worm. Let's face it, you have to have a plastic worm rod. Let me show you a really fine plastic worm rod. I have some reservations about this rod. I want to tell you a few things about it. This is a 7-foot medium heavy action. It's just a perfect worm rod. It's again a favorite rod. It's not one of their expensive ones. It's one of their lower price ones, but it's a really good one. I happen to have this one set up on 30-pound braid. 30-pound braid is just perfect on this rod, and I have it on the Cinco. I throw that Cinco either with the weights on it or the weights off of it just so much of the time. I just throw it you have to have a worm rod. Now, I like to have a worm rod ready at all times because I like to use it for a backup. If I'm fishing a frog and I miss a fish on a frog, I like to instantly throw the worm rod in there, okay? So having a ready backup is a big deal. But you can also use this worm rod for something other than worm fishing. And what I would say you could use it for is, number one, it's the perfect rod for spinnerbaits and buzzbaits. Now it happens to be 30-pound braid on there, and it could be 20-pound monofilament, it could be 15-pound monofilament. But again, it's the perfect rod, it's the perfect action for both spinnerbaits and buzzbaits. Now, again, this pretty heavy line, you can't really use a clip like, you know, the little line clip that you saw me use on those leather lures. You put the line clip on this buzzbait and it kind of falls around. It just doesn't hang in there good. That's not good. So really, here's the problem. Sure, I can cut that line and I can put that spinnerbait on there in just a second, and it's really the right combination. But what about if I want a backup rod? All of a sudden, I don't have a backup rod anymore. That's the problem with having just 3 rods. I can cut that worm off. That's fine. Take my spinnerbait, which is just a big time deal. I'm throwing spinnerbaits a lot of the times. Put the spinnerbait on. Again, this is a perfect rod for that. It's a perfect rod. This happens to be 30-pound braid. Just come through there, and rather than spend the time to cut it off, I'm just going to let it dangle just for a second. I'm just going to go real fast and just to let you know. That rod is a perfect spinnerbait rod. I can throw it just right. It's just the right action. It's actually a worm rod, which I'm just a little bit tight right here. It's a worm rod that I'm doubling as a spinnerbait rod and as a buzzbait rod, those 2 rods. So basically, what I've done now, again, I don't have a backup with the worm, so I wish I had a second rod or even a third rod of these. But theoretically, I can take all my top favorite lures, all my top 10, and consolidate them to 3 rods. If you're on that kind of a budget, okay. But what I would suggest you do, I would suggest you get a couple of each. So instead of having just 3 rods, you get 3 rod actions, but you really have 6 rods to fish with. Now that kind of gets you there, because there's a lot of different patterns. When you go fishing, a fish breaks over here, and then there's a cloud comes by, and there's a big swirl in the point, and then there's a crankbait bite, and then there's a frog biter in the weeds. So there's a lot of things going on. You go around the corner, and all of a sudden you find a tree, a beaver had just cut down. You didn't even know the tree was there until you cut it down that night. You throw a jig in there and catch a fish just that quick. So conditions change, patterns change. You need rods ready. You need a ready rod. But anyway, I've explained the 3 rods that I suggest you need, and I think you can get the job done. Listen, I post every Wednesday about 6 o'clock, every Sunday about 6 o'clock. I enjoy doing these little how-to videos. I really have a big time doing it. And so I just appreciate you subscribing. Hey, and thanks for watching.